For centuries, humanity was seen as weak and insignificant. A young species from a chaotic world. Physically fragile. Emotionally volatile. Endlessly divided. In the records of the Galactic Council, Earth was a statistical curiosity. Moderate intelligence, high instability, negligible long-term threat. Humanity's early ventures beyond its home system were clumsy and inefficient, plagued by internal conflict and short-lived alliances. To an ancient galaxy that valued predictability above all else, humans looked unfinished. Ignored by the galaxy. Dismissed by those in power. The Council believed danger followed a familiar shape. Powerful civilizations announced themselves with expansion fleets, rigid hierarchies, and demands for recognition. Humanity did none of that. They argued among themselves. Failed publicly. Rebuilt imperfectly. Progress came in uneven bursts, followed by setbacks that seemed to confirm every negative projection. To the Council, this meant safety. No one realized how dangerous that assumption was. Because humanity did not evolve in comfort. They evolved in failure. Their history was a catalogue of systems breaking at the worst possible moment, economies collapsing, governments dissolving, institutions failing without warning. Survival was never guaranteed. It had to be rebuilt again and again, from whatever remained. Humans learned early that authority could vanish overnight. That rules could change without permission. That stability was temporary, and preparation was not optional. So when humanity first encountered the wider galaxy, they did not arrive with ambition or entitlement. They observed, listened, studied how power actually functioned beyond ideals and charters. They noticed something unsettling. The galaxy did not rule through force. It ruled through access. Who could trade? Who could travel? Who could speak? And who could be quietly removed from relevance? Humanity paid attention. When formal contact was established, it was deliberately unremarkable. Requests were filed correctly. Protocols followed precisely. No urgency. No defiance. No challenge. Humanity behaved exactly as a minor, manageable civilization was expected to behave. And the Council stopped watching. Years passed. Then decades. Human space grew quieter. Less visible. Less demanding. To the Council, it appeared humanity had stalled, another species contained by its own limitations, waiting for internal pressures to finish the job. They believed humanity would break eventually. They were patient. They miscalculated. Because humanity did not disappear from the galaxy to recover. They disappeared to prepare. They stopped trying to be understood by institutions that had already decided their fate. They stopped seeking validation from powers that mistook noise for strength. They turned inward, not in despair, but with intent. The Council assumed silence meant weakness. They never considered that silence could be discipline. They never asked what a species becomes when it no longer expects rescue, recognition, or inclusion. By the time irregularities began to surface, trade routes behaving strangely, data returning inconsistencies, regions of space no longer aligning with predictive models, it was already too late to revisit old assumptions. Humanity had not been waiting to break. They had been waiting for the moment when breaking was no longer an option. And when that moment came, the galaxy would learn a lesson the Council had forgotten long ago. The most dangerous civilizations are not the ones that rise loudly. They are the ones that endure quietly, until endurance becomes power. The Galactic Council tightened its grip. Not with fleets or ultimatums. Those were reserved for threats that mattered. Humanity was handled with something far more effective: policy, procedure, quiet exclusion wrapped in legality. First came the trade restrictions. Human shipping corridors were flagged for extended review. Docking clearances stalled indefinitely. Insurance networks quietly reclassified human vessels as unreliable risk, making commerce collapse without a single law being openly broken. Trade was cut. Medical compounds stopped arriving. Advanced alloys were delayed, then cancelled. Precision components vanished from supply chains entirely. Peripheral colonies felt it first, then the core worlds. Prices climbed. Shortages spread. Council economists watched the data with calm certainty. They had seen this pattern countless times. Scarcity bred unrest. Unrest bred division. Division forced compliance. Then came the legal severance. Rights were revoked. Human representatives lost access to council chambers. Observer status was suspended under vague language, pending reassessment. Information networks that once returned open data now delivered filtered fragments or silence. Travel permits expired and were not renewed. Diplomatic channels collapsed into automated acknowledgments. Humanity wasn't condemned. It was erased. Isolation followed naturally. No fleets blockaded Earth. No weapons darkened human skies. The Council didn't need force. They simply removed humanity from the systems that sustained interstellar civilization, trade, arbitration, legitimacy, and waited. Humanity was pushed into isolation with the confidence of an authority that had done this many times before. The Council expected collapse. They expected humanity's long history of internal division to resurface under pressure. Expected colonies to hoard resources. Expected governments to fracture and turn on one another as scarcity deepened. Projections were filed. Months to instability. 1 year to unrest. 2 years to submission. But the collapse never came. Instead, something deeply unsettling happened. Human systems stabilized. Emergency measures activated before shortages peaked. Manufacturing priorities shifted quietly, without public debate. Rationing was implemented efficiently and calmly. There were no mass riots. No planetary secessions. Human communication traffic surged, but not with outrage. With coordination. Political rivals who had undermined one another for generations began sharing data without treaties or announcements. Long-standing disputes were shelved, not resolved, but rendered irrelevant. The Council flagged the anomaly, then dismissed it. They mistook restraint for denial. What they failed to understand was that humanity had rehearsed this scenario its entire history. Economic crashes, political failures, environmental disasters, systems breaking when they were needed most. Isolation wasn't shocking. It was familiar. Humanity did not demand reinstatement, did not appeal to council morality, did not threaten retaliation. They did something far more dangerous. They stopped asking. Trade rerouted inward. Local industries expanded into roles once outsourced to the galaxy. Older technologies were revived, redesigned, and scaled beyond what council regulations had ever allowed. Every rule was followed, perfectly. Every clause obeyed to the letter. Every loophole used without technically violating a single statute. Sanctions meant to isolate human space began rippling outward, damaging council-aligned economies that had quietly depended on human adaptability. The Council waited for fracture. It never came. Instead, human space grew quieter, more ordered, more deliberate. Reports began to note a troubling trend. Humanity was becoming self-sufficient, less responsive to pressure, less dependent on approval, less affected by authority that only functioned when it was believed in. Containment had always worked because species feared isolation. Humanity did not. They treated it as a condition to engineer around. And somewhere deep in the Council's projections, a realization began to take shape, one no one wanted to say aloud. They had not weakened humanity. They had given it the one thing it needed to stop caring what the Council wanted at all. Isolation was supposed to finish the work. That was the Council's certainty. History supported it. When a civilization was cut off from trade, legitimacy, and outside support, it fractured. Old grudges resurfaced. Cooperation collapsed into competition. Collapse was not a question of if, only when. Humanity should have broken. It didn't. Isolation didn't break humanity. It unified them. At first, the change was almost imperceptible. Political broadcasts grew shorter. Ideological arguments lost their fury. Leaders who had built careers on division found fewer audiences willing to listen. When the last sanctioned trade lanes went silent, humanity stopped debating who was right and started asking something far more urgent. Who would still be alive tomorrow? Old divisions vanished. Not erased. Not forgiven. Set aside. Borders remained on maps, but they stopped dictating behavior. Rival governments paused conflicts that had lasted centuries, without treaties, without ceremonies, without speeches. Humanity didn't celebrate unity. They defaulted to it. Because isolation stripped away illusion. There was no higher authority to appeal to. No external stabilizer to rely on. No council fleet arriving to impose order if things went wrong. Humanity was alone. And once that reality settled in, priorities aligned with brutal clarity. Emergency councils formed across Earth and its colonies, but instead of expanding bureaucracy, they dismantled it. Redundant authorities were merged or discarded. Decision chains were shortened. Not centralized for dominance, but streamlined for speed and response. What emerged wasn't an empire. It was coordination. For the first time in human history, every major colony agreed on a single operational framework. Not built on ideology. Not culture. Not ambition. Survival. All colonies stood under one command. It wasn't a throne or a single ruler. It was a system, lean, adaptive, unforgiving of inefficiency. Authority became situational. Whoever had the clearest data and fastest response acted. Prestige evaporated. Ego became a liability overnight. Logistics became power. Supply chains that once competed synchronized across systems. Manufacturing priorities aligned without negotiation. Research institutions opened archives sealed for generations, sharing breakthroughs once guarded by profit, secrecy, or national pride. Humanity stopped optimizing against itself. They optimized for endurance. Military forces changed, not in size, but in purpose. Fleets once designed to deter rivals were restructured to protect infrastructure, evacuation corridors, and population centers. Training doctrine abandoned decisive victories in favor of prolonged survival under catastrophic conditions. Humanity stopped planning for wars they hoped to win. They planned for disasters they intended to outlast. Civilians were folded into preparedness without ceremony. Engineers trained for emergency repair. Medics drilled for mass casualty scenarios. Colonists learned redundancy protocols as naturally as daily routines. Every person became part of the system, not as a soldier, but as a stabilizing component. Humanity did not militarize its population. It prepared it. Then came the silence. No protests. No defiant broadcasts. No pleas sent into the void. Human communication traffic actually decreased, even as coordination reached levels no external observer had ever recorded. Unity did not make humanity louder. It made them efficient. Focused. Unsettlingly calm. Council analysts, watching from afar, misread the data. Silence had always meant submission before. They believed humanity had accepted isolation. That exclusion had taught them humility. In truth, isolation had taught humanity clarity. They stopped measuring success by recognition or inclusion. They measured it by resilience. By how well systems held under pressure. By how little external approval mattered when survival was at stake. Isolation did what no treaty ever had. It forced humanity to see itself as a single organism. Every colony understood its role. Every fleet knew its purpose. Every citizen knew what was at stake. If no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. Not out of anger. Not out of defiance. Out of necessity. And in that moment, quiet, deliberate, irreversible, the Council's patience became its greatest miscalculation. They had not waited for humanity to break. They had waited long enough for humanity to unite, and to realize it would never again depend on anyone else to decide whether it survived. In silence, humanity evolved. There were no announcements. No grand unveilings meant to reclaim relevance. No signals sent into the void demanding recognition. Humanity had learned that attention invited pressure, and pressure invited control. So they worked where no one was looking. Isolation stripped away distraction. Research institutions that once competed for funding and prestige were reorganized into cooperative networks. Projects delayed for political convenience were revived and accelerated by necessity. Engineers stopped designing for ideal conditions and started designing for failure, assuming systems would break, supply lines would vanish, and help would never come. New engines came first. Not engines built for speed or expansion, but for endurance. drives capable of operating for years without resupply, propulsion systems tolerant of damage, inefficiency, and improvised repair. Human ships sacrificed elegance for reliability, favoring designs that could limp forward instead of dying spectacularly. They could go farther without support. They could stay operational without resupply. They no longer needed permission to move. Then came the shields. Galactic doctrine favored singular, overwhelming barriers, immense constructs that either held perfectly or failed catastrophically. Humanity rejected that approach entirely. They layered everything. Adaptive fields that reshaped under stress. Redundant systems that degraded gradually instead of collapsing all at once. Structural composites that absorbed force rather than attempting to negate it outright. Human shields were not invincible. They were persistent. They bent. They cracked. They kept working. Weapons followed, but quietly. Humanity did not chase extinction-level firepower or theatrical superweapons. They focused on systems that functioned after prolonged isolation. Weapons that could be repaired in deep space by exhausted crews with limited tools. Human weapons were not impressive. They were dependable. And then there were the fleets. They were not assembled in massive, centralized shipyards that could be observed, catalogued, and destroyed. Production was distributed across dozens of systems. Hull sections fabricated in civilian industries. Components built to common standards, modular, interchangeable, resilient. No single ship mattered. No single loss could cripple the whole. Fleets were built not for conquest, but survival. Naval doctrine evolved alongside them. Ships were designed to operate independently, cut off from command, guided by shared principles rather than constant instruction. Crews were cross-trained relentlessly. Every officer understood logistics. Every technician understood combat repair. Human fleets assumed chaos as the baseline. Loss of communication. Overwhelming odds. Extended isolation. They trained until those conditions felt routine. The galaxy noticed nothing. Council sensors detected no alarming mobilization. No aggressive maneuvers. No treaty violations. Human space appeared quiet, constrained, irrelevant. Exactly as intended. While the galaxy looked away, humanity prepared. Not for revenge. For inevitability. Human simulations grew darker. Scenarios assumed hostile powers, collapsing alliances, and enemies immune to diplomacy. Victory was redefined. Not defeat the enemy. Ensure continuation. If a colony survived, the mission succeeded. If a fleet endured catastrophic loss and still functioned, the mission succeeded. If humanity remained, everything else was secondary. Command structures flattened. Authority became situational. Any unit could assume control. Any plan could be abandoned instantly if reality demanded it. Humanity stopped fearing failure. They learned to absorb it. The Council, reviewing outdated reports, concluded humanity had stagnated. That isolation had capped their growth. That patience would eventually be rewarded with collapse. They were wrong. Humanity had not slowed. They had finished building. What remained was refinement. Stress testing. Quiet positioning beyond assumption and observation. And when the galaxy finally looked back, when something emerged that authority could not debate away, it would not find a weak civilization waiting to break. It would find a species that had spent years preparing to survive a universe that never planned to protect them. And by then, preparation would matter far more than permission. The first warning did not arrive as an attack. It arrived as silence. A frontier system missed its scheduled transmission window. No distress call. No debris. No indication of malfunction. Council analysts logged it as a relay fault and moved on. Border systems failed all the time. Space was vast. Errors were expected. Then another system went dark. Then another. By the time evacuation traffic began spilling through unsanctioned jump routes, the pattern could no longer be denied. Refugee ships arrived overloaded and damaged, carrying corrupted recordings, fragmented telemetry, and a single name spoken with exhausted certainty. The Dominion. They did not announce themselves. They did not negotiate. They arrived. The Dominion was not an alliance or a crusade. It was an empire engineered for expansion, every doctrine refined for speed, efficiency, and permanence. Their fleets moved with mechanical precision, overwhelming defenses before panic could organize into resistance. Worlds fell. Orbital platforms were neutralized in minutes. Planetary shields collapsed under sustained, methodical pressure. Defense fleets were dismantled in sequence, not in heroic last stands, but in clean operations that left no room for improvisation. Infrastructure was seized intact. The Dominion did not seek destruction. They sought ownership. Species were enslaved, not exterminated, catalogued. Populations were sorted by utility. Administrators were retained under supervision. Labor forces reassigned. Entire cultures reduced to production quotas and compliance metrics. Resistance was not punished publicly. It was removed. Quietly. Efficiently. Permanently. Fear spread faster than the invasion itself. Council-aligned task forces were deployed, veteran fleets armed with technologies that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia. They engaged the Dominion and vanished. Not in spectacular explosions, but in silence. Signals cut off mid-transmission. Formations dissolved without explanation. The Dominion studied, adapted, and advanced. And still, the Council argued. Emergency assemblies convened and collapsed into procedural paralysis. Ancient rivalries resurfaced. Voting blocs stalled action. Committees debated jurisdiction and response thresholds, while live feeds showed cities burning and evacuation corridors failing. Some delegates called for negotiation. Others demanded sanctions. A few proposed sacrifice, ceding outer systems to buy time. Time was something the Dominion did not allow. As invasion fronts pushed inward, Council authority began to fracture. Member species recalled fleets to defend their own worlds. Mutual defense treaties were reinterpreted, delayed, or quietly ignored. Trade collapsed as fear overrode obligation. The Council could recommend. It could debate. It could not act. Within cycles, the unthinkable became undeniable. The Galactic Council, the oldest authority the galaxy had ever known, was losing. That was when the chamber fell silent. Someone spoke the name no one had wanted to consider. Humanity. The objections came instantly. Humanity had been isolated, sanctioned, declared irrelevant. Their fleets were undocumented. Their technology unverified. Their civilization, by Council projections, should have collapsed years ago under exile and pressure. But others remembered. Human space had gone quiet long before the Dominion appeared. No collapse. No refugee waves. No desperate transmissions begging for reintegration. Just absence, orderly, deliberate absence. Reluctantly, the Council authorized contact. The message was careful, polite, urgent without sounding desperate. It spoke of shared survival, collective defense, and the need for unity against an existential threat. It did not mention sanctions. It did not include apologies. Humanity received it. They did not respond immediately. While Council worlds burned, humanity reviewed the data. Dominion fleet movements. Tactical doctrine. Logistics throughput. Behavioral patterns. They compared it against internal simulations, some of which mirrored the unfolding invasion with unsettling accuracy. The Council expected panic. They received silence. Hours passed. Then days. Another system fell, this one close enough to the Council core that evacuation alerts echoed through the chamber itself. Delegates who had argued procedure moments earlier now pleaded openly for intervention. When humanity finally replied, the response was calm, measured, almost disconcertingly precise. They acknowledged the Dominion threat. They confirmed the Council's defenses would fail. They stated, plainly, that humanity possessed the capability to engage. There was no promise of rescue, only consideration. The Council protested, invoked shared destiny, demanded urgency, reminded humanity of what was at stake. Humanity did not hurry, because the truth was now unavoidable. The Council had waited for humanity to break. They had waited for exile to do its work. They had waited for isolation to collapse a species they believed was fragile. Instead, They had waited just long enough for the galaxy to need humanity, and to have no leverage left when asking. As another council world burned in real time, the oldest authority in the galaxy faced a reality it had never prepared for. The Dominion did not fear authority. It did not respect tradition. It did not pause for debate. And the only civilization that had prepared for an enemy like that was the one the Council had dismissed as weak. With no options remaining and no illusions left to cling to, the Galactic Council did the unthinkable. They turned to humanity, not as a subordinate, not as a member, but as the last civilization that might still be capable of acting, while the rest of the galaxy was still arguing over what should have been done. And in that moment, the Council finally understood the depth of its miscalculation. They had not been waiting for humanity to break. They had been waiting for the galaxy to reach a point where only humanity would be ready to respond. The Council expected forgiveness. They prepared for it instinctively, carefully chosen words, softened admissions, blame diluted into circumstance rather than intent. In every crisis before this one, desperation had produced reconciliation. Authority bent just enough to survive. They believed humanity would do the same. Humanity did not. The response arrived without ceremony. No accusations. No recounting of exile. No emotional appeal. Just confirmation that the data had been received, and a precise breakdown of where the Council's projections failed. The analysis was clinical. Invasion vectors misjudged. Response times overestimated. Defensive assumptions invalid. The Council read in growing unease as humanity calmly explained, line by line, why the existing galactic defenses would not hold. Then came the decision. Not a speech. Not a declaration. A single statement. We will decide when to act. No conditions followed. No demand for apology. No request for authority. Just resolve. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted about moral obligation and collective extinction. Some accused humanity of cruelty. Others of arrogance. A few attempted to reassert authority, invoking charters, emergency powers, and sanctions that no longer carried weight. Humanity did not respond. They didn't need to, because authority does not survive the moment it is ignored. Within hours, deep space observatories began reporting anomalies along the edges of human-controlled space. Not weapons fire. Not fleet mobilization. Something quieter. Gravitational sensors detected rhythmic distortions, too precise to be natural. Navigation beacons recalibrated themselves without instruction. Light bent at imperceptible angles, as though space itself were being adjusted rather than disturbed. Council engineers blamed calibration drift. They were wrong. Independent traders reported vast silhouettes appearing briefly beyond sensor resolution, too large to classify, too controlled to be random. Not fleets assembling, but structures aligning. Patterns forming across regions too wide to be coincidence. Humanity was not rushing to war. They were positioning. A final transmission arrived, short, unencrypted, unmistakably human. Any engagement with the Dominion would occur on human terms. Timing, location, and scope would be determined by human command. Council authorization was unnecessary. Oversight would not be accepted. This was not a threat. It was a boundary. For the first time since its founding, the Galactic Council confronted a truth it could not debate away. Humanity did not need its permission, did not fear its displeasure, did not confuse urgency with obligation. As the chamber dissolved into chaos, something unexpected happened on the invasion front. The Dominion slowed. Not halted. Not repelled. Just slowed, enough for their commanders to sense inconsistencies in predictive models that had never failed before. Enough to feel resistance before it appeared. Somewhere beyond the reach of Council authority, something vast finished positioning itself. Space itself began to tremble. Humanity had not yet acted. But the galaxy already understood what the Council had only just realized. Forgiveness is asked by the powerless. Permission is sought by the dependent. Humanity was neither. And when they finally chose to act, it would not be because the Council had asked, but because humanity had decided the moment had arrived. The Dominion never understood when the war began. There was no surge of power, no rupture in subspace, no warning spike screaming across their sensors. One moment, Dominion armadas advanced through conquered systems with mechanical certainty, vast fleets arranged in doctrines refined by centuries of unchallenged expansion. The next moment, space was no longer empty. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence. They did not arrive from anywhere. There was no translation flash, no violent distortion, no telltale bloom of energy. They simply resolved into existence, immense forms unfolding from the dark as if reality itself had accepted their presence. Massive, precise, unstoppable. The formations made no sense to Dominion tacticians. They were not clustered for assault or spread for intimidation. They occupied exact positions across light minutes of space, sealing escape vectors the Dominion had not yet realized were critical. This was not a battle line. It was containment. Dominion sensors struggled to reconcile the data. Targeting solutions lagged behind reality. Command algorithms recalculated endlessly, unable to explain how an opposing force of that scale had appeared without triggering a single early warning threshold. Before a firing order could be issued, every channel lit up at once. Primary command bands, encrypted tactical relays, emergency fallback frequencies, even internal coordination networks believed to be unreachable. One message crossed every protocol simultaneously. Stand down. It wasn't amplified. It carried no threat. It carried certainty. The Dominion fired. They always did. The opening volley never reached its targets. Human defenses did not intercept the energy. They absorbed it. Layered fields reshaped in real time, bending and redistributing force across systems designed to endure punishment rather than resist it. Power that should have shattered any known shield simply vanished into controlled dissipation. The Dominion adapted instantly. They never fired again. Across the invasion fleet, weapon systems desynchronized by fractions of a second, imperceptible individually, catastrophic together. Power grids slipped out of phase. Reactors throttled down to emergency limits. Shields collapsed inward, not destroyed, but rendered inert. Drives failed. Thousands of ships went dead in space. Alive. Intact. Helpless. Humanity had not attacked the fleet. They had removed its ability to fight. Dominion command structures unraveled in moments. Emergency protocols refused to execute. Self-destruct systems failed silently. Engineers flooded dead channels, unable to understand why the redundancies they trusted most had turned against them. Human systems were not overpowering Dominion technology. They were exploiting it. They reached into assumptions so fundamental the Dominion had never thought to protect them. Dependencies that functioned flawlessly against weaker civilizations and catastrophically against an opponent that had built everything around resilience instead of dominance. Then one human vessel moved. It advanced alone, gliding forward with deliberate calm. Its hull bore no insignia, no declaration of authority, just a presence so controlled it felt inevitable. It transmitted once more. This conflict is concluded. There were no demands, no negotiations. The statement was final. As the signal propagated through Dominion command networks, fleets in neighboring systems halted mid-advance. Slave transports powered down. Occupation forces abandoned positions without orders, uncertain whether movement itself would trigger the same silent neutralization. The war ended before the enemy understood it had begun. Only then did humanity acknowledge the galaxy. A single open transmission, brief, factual, and devoid of triumph. The threat had been neutralized. Hostilities were concluded. No territory had changed hands. Humanity had not come to conquer. They had come to stop the war. Council observers watched in stunned silence as Dominion armadas drifted powerless in the dark, entire fleets undone without spectacle, without devastation, without permission. And in that moment, the truth became impossible to ignore. The Council had waited for humanity to break. Instead, they had waited long enough for humanity to decide. And when humanity acted, the war did not roar into history. It ended quietly. Because against a civilization that prepared for failure, even conquest could not survive first contact. The Council tried to reclaim control. Emergency assemblies were convened within hours of the Dominion's defeat. Ancient charters were retrieved and recited as if tradition itself could restore authority. Oversight committees multiplied. Jurisdiction was declared with sharper language and louder voices. The galaxy listened. Then it moved on. It was too late. Because authority does not return once it has been proven unnecessary. Worlds rebuilt without waiting for council approval. Defense compacts formed laterally, between neighbors who had watched procedure fail while systems burned. Trade resumed along routes humanity had stabilized, not the sanctioned corridors the council once regulated. The council still existed, but it no longer decided what happened next. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They refused every offer of permanent leadership, declined expanded authority, ignored proposals to restructure galactic governance around them. They claimed no territory, imposed no laws, demanded no tribute. They simply stepped back, not into obscurity, but into readiness. Human fleets dispersed into the dark in patterns no strategist could fully map. They did not hover over capitals or patrol borders. They positioned themselves near fracture zones, regions where history showed authority failed first and consequences spread fastest. Always distant, always present, never demanding obedience. Slowly, the galaxy understood what humanity had become. Not conquerors, not rulers, a contingency. When disputes flared, humanity did not intervene. When empires tested one another's resolve, humanity remained silent. They issued no threats. They promised no protection. Their presence alone changed behavior. Former Dominion officers, those few left alive and unbound, spoke quietly among themselves. Not of human weapons, but of human restraint. Of fleets that could have annihilated them and chose instead to end the war cleanly, decisively, and without spectacle. That restraint carried more weight than fear ever could. The Council issued one final declaration, warning that a galaxy without centralized authority would descend into chaos. Few listened. Fewer believed it. Because the galaxy had learned something the Council never had. Stability enforced by tradition eventually fails. Stability enforced by readiness endures. Humanity had proven that leadership was not inherited through age, titles, or charters. It emerged from preparation, from competence, from the willingness to act when action was required, and the discipline to stop when it was not. So the galaxy adapted. It always does. And somewhere beyond the bright halls where authority once lived, humanity watched the stars in silence. Not from thrones. Not from councils. From the dark. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They had no desire to. They had simply proven a truth no civilization could afford to forget. If darkness rises again, if something worse comes out of the void, if the galaxy hesitates when it matters most, humanity will be there. Not to command, not to conquer, but to make sure there is still a galaxy left when the darkness falls.